Okay, so today I would like to talk about new paradigms in healthcare and what I think every functional medicine coach, practitioner and doctor should know about homeopathy so that they can have an informed and current opinion. It's been my experience over the years that in casual conversation, whenever I mention the word homeopathy, it's almost like a curse word or a taboo subject, and instantly I lose my credibility. So I got thinking about why, why there was this negative reaction to the word homeopathy. And I came to the conclusion that it was because of a combination of confusion and fear. Yes, I'd like to try give some clarity on the topic and help to dispel any fears that either you as practitioners might have, or that your clients may have. So the aim of the presentation is to basically give context to the confusion and the prejudice around homeopathy. And I think this is quite relevant because functional medicine is also viewed with a lot of confusion and prejudice. So I think that the homeopathic journey, there are some mirrors with the functional medicine journey to legitimacy, basically. So I also would like to explain the backdrop to whenever there is conflict within the paradigm, especially of the current medical paradigm. And that backdrop is one of cognitive dissonance, which means that people reject anything new if it conflicts with their beliefs. So I think that's an important sort of concept to park in the corner. I'd also like to show how a lot of this resistance, the negative reaction, the taboo subject that homeopathy tends to be, is based on fear and ignorance. And this is not new. Whenever something is not understood or not well understood, people do resist it. And I'd like to do all of this through my own experience, sharing my own experience. And I've got two cases at the end, which will hopefully also, give more clarity in terms of like what it actually looks like when you get homeopathic care. And then in my case, how I combine the homeopathic care with the functional medicine care, or how I choose which is the right and appropriate modality for any given patient or client. So who am I? Briefly, I entered the portal of, I entered healthcare through the portal of homeopathy when I was 18. And I really didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I'm still here all those years later. And over the years, I added some extra tools to my skill set, which includes functional medicine. And currently, I'm in a bit of a creative frame where I'm working on almost, putting everything that I've learned over the years into teachable formats and into my book. So I'm also an expat South African who's been living in the Netherlands for 4.5 years. I'm a mother to 2 healthy teenagers, and I'm married to my my soulmate, luckily, and he's also my partner in wellness. He's a chiropractor. So that's just more on a personal note, but my practice has gone through an evolution. And the reason I show this slide is because I think it mirrors the bigger picture. I think it mirrors the evolution that we're experiencing in healthcare at the moment. So I started with homeopathy, and you'll also see in my cases how, because the cases were patients that I treated over many years, how I started with homeopathy, and then I added naturopathic principles, or naturopathic interventions. I then used biofeedback therapy, and that pretty much led me to another level, which was when I started to use functional medicine. So that's been the evolution in my practice over the last 21 years. And so I think that, you know, homeopathy and possibly functional medicine in some ways meets with resistance because of a paradigm conflict. And so the context is that we have a mechanistic and a vitalistic worldview. And the mechanistic worldview is involved with matter, and the vitalistic worldview is involved more with energy. So this is the context, and this is the backdrop to a lot of resistance to change in healthcare, I believe anyway. So how do we integrate the best of both? And I came across this slide about a new paradigm in health, and I really liked it because of its inclusivity. And I think that a new paradigm in health, one of the basic tenets is inclusivity. And so you'll see that essentially lifestyle interventions, including functional medicine, alternative and complementary therapies like homeopathy and other energy medicines, they all have a place and they're all reflected. And the idea is that you start with, as your primary intervention, you start with the most natural and safest intervention. And as pathology becomes more severe, you bring out the big guns. You then bring out the chemical medicine and the surgery. So this is obviously, I'm talking about chronic care. I'm not talking about acute care or life-threatening situations. So this is what I propose a new paradigm in health should look like. And as you can see, there's a place for everything. There's a place for both the conventional medical approach, but there's also lots of room for the lifestyle approaches and the alternative and complementary modalities as well. So I'm going to talk very briefly about the mechanistic view, just so we can sort of understand what it means, or what I mean when I talk about the mechanistic view. And so basically, mechanism is when you view the universe, you view everything material, you know, everything alive and dead, or not dead, but everything that's living as a machine. And so this comes back, you know, it had its roots in the 17th century. It had its roots in reductionism and rationalism. And so, yeah, we're going back, you know, a couple of hundred years. And all of this is was very, very revolutionary at the time. There were a lot of scientific discoveries and things that are still very relevant to this day. But there are also some limitations if you take this view of life, or you have this view, and maybe you have someone that walks into your clinic that needs a different approach. So, so the mechanistic view is great when you have to fix a broken bone or replace an organ that has failed. You know, so it talks about nature working according to mechanical laws, and it talks about how complex structures, whether you know, plants, animals, or the human body, are all reduced to the smallest constituent. So that is very reminiscent of the medical model, where you have all these specialisms, and where pathology is reduced to the smallest, you know, constituent. So let's park that in one arena, and then, oh wait, we're still on mechanism. So the mechanistic view leads to the belief that we are matter, and we are basically a collection of molecules, cells, tissues, organs, and systems, and that collectively is known as our physical body. So in the mechanistic view, we are governed by physical laws and chemical laws, so things like gravity and Avogadro's law. So the problem with this view is that if it can't be measured, if it can't be quantified, then it doesn't exist. And that is where the mechanistic view has a problem with explaining homeopathy. So yeah, you can understand, I mean, homeopathic medicines are dilutions, and so we'll get more into that when I talk about homeopathy, but like I said, this is the context. So on the other side of the court, we have vitalism, and vitalism basically probably predated mechanism, but it's been sort of having a bit of a resurgence, or it's been having a comeback pretty much since 200 years. So vitalism basically talks about everything having a vital force that animates it, and it can have this force can have many names, and some people call it a spark or energy or a soul, but it's ultimately an intangible element, and it can be quite easily confused. So if we're talking about vitalism in the health context, people can get quite easily confused with vitalism in a spiritual or religious context. So that's another reason why there can be so much confusion in these vitalistic healing arts, is they get confused with spirituality and religion. So the vitalistic worldview basically has the belief that we are energy, and so there are many systems of healing that utilize this belief. So we have the meridians in Chinese medicine, and we have the chakras. So this is the other side of the court, okay, and that the belief that we are energy. And vitalism basically was, like I say, rediscovered when people were through a number of biologists that were involved with organic chemistry, and they proposed that life is sustained and explained by an immeasurable intelligent force or energy. So call that what you will. This is what the organic chemists of the 1800s were saying. And the reason why I think this is important in the context of homeopathy and functional medicine is that I believe that homeopathy is vitalistic, and I believe that functional medicine has a very strong vitalistic element too, because it is involved with regeneration, and it's involved with regeneration of the body by providing the right inputs. So vitalism believes that the body has self-healing ability, provided you're given the right inputs. So things like sleep, nutrition, movement, and obviously a healthy environment. So the vitalistic view is very dependent on our outside world. And I just wanted to add a list. This list isn't exhaustive. There's probably a lot more that we can add, but most so-called complementary and alternative health professions fall under the umbrella of vitalistic modalities. So you'll see there's a lot of I would say all original or indigenous medicines are vitalistic. traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, phytotherapy, chiropractic, some schools. There are some mechanistic, very strongly mechanistic schools as well. And there's some very strongly vitalistic schools as well. So they within that one modality, they have their own paradigm friction. And then we have osteopathy, naturopathy, craniosacral therapy, aromatherapy, and homeopathy. So these are just a few examples of the modalities that fall under the umbrella of vitalism. Personally, I believe we are both. And so, that's probably one of the strong themes of my presentation and of my work in general, is the themes of inclusivity and the themes of integration and the power of integration. And I guess I've been primed to that because, I grew up in apartheid South Africa, and so I'm very alert to polarization, and I'm very alert to the negative effect that polarization has on people's psyches. So I personally believe that, especially in this situation where I'm talking about a new paradigm in health, that integration and inclusivity is part of it. This is a silly little teaching tool that I used to use in my practice. So my kids came home from an outing, and a school outing, and I promptly grabbed this and said, this is going to be useful for me. I've used it to explain what homeopathy is and what biofeedback therapy is to many a skeptical patient, and they've generally left feeling very reassured with their bottles of homeopathic remedy and dutifully following my instructions. So when we're talking about energy medicine, providing a context that people can relate to is important. So the context that people can relate to is the electromagnetic spectrum. So given that this is probably a bit oversimplified and it's geared towards the primary school learner, you can just forgive me for that. But like I say, this is a context that people can relate to. And so what I would say to patients was, this is an electromagnetic spectrum, and it's a collection of frequencies. And these frequencies are, they're all different. Some of them are large, and some of them are small. Some of them are palpable, you can feel them. Some of them you can hear, some of them you can see, and some of them you are none the wiser that they are intangible and they're invisible. And so homeopathy and some of the other energy medicines basically fall on the side of the spectrum, more sort of to the right. So, one has to, educate people by providing context, things that are familiar, things that are reliable, and obviously things that are true. And then, then you can bring in where the unfamiliar and the scary and the, the unknown parts come in. So that was, yes, something which I used in my practice as a teaching tool to reassure people as to what I was doing as a homeopath and what I was giving them, and giving them some context. So, all right, what is homeopathy? So is it placebo? Because that's, I used to get so offended when people would say to me, homeopathy is nothing but placebo. And then a couple of years into my practice, I would basically find it quite funny, because the power of placebo is really no laughing matter. There's nothing to be diminished. The power of placebo is really powerful, and if you can harness that reliably, then you can probably make a lot of money. So in a sense, no, homeopathy is not placebo because it works on animals. But it is one of the myths and one of the frequent ways that it's sort of put down in the public, and generally whenever someone gets a chance, that's what they say. So homeopathy is a system of remedies made from plants, animals, and minerals. It's based, so the remedies are prescribed on the basis of similarity. So basically, homeopathy is the opposite of allopathy, and allopathy is another name for conventional medicine. But allopathy means that you're prescribing something that will do the opposite. So if you have pain, you give a painkiller. And so in that sense, homeopathy is philosophically opposite to a lot of conventional medical practices. Not all, but most. So the remedies work by stimulating the body's own innate healing ability. So the remedies in themselves don't do anything. They don't work like paracetamol or a chemical medicine. So that's another thing which people don't really understand. The remedies are prepared by in a preparation using successive dilutions and succussions, which is shaking. And the dilutions go beyond Avogadro's number. So there is no measurable amount of the original substance left for most of the dilutions. So basically the idea is that there is some sort of memory left behind in the solute, whether it's water or alcohol, of the original substance. And so that is sort of where research is looking at the moment. The origins of homeopathy. So I'm basically not describing homeopathy as you would, like if you Google sort of what is homeopathy, and you just count Wikipedia and you read what everybody else writes about homeopathy. I'm not going to actually describe homeopathy in those terms, because that you can easily read up. And I also think that, I don't think any of you will be prescribing homeopathy. So you need to have the background knowledge to know when to refer to a homeopath, or when your client or your patient might benefit from homeopathy, or maybe they seek a homeopath and they someone that's not necessarily trained in functional medicine, and it's just also not appropriate. So this is just to give you that philosophical and contextual understanding of when is it appropriate, when is homeopathy appropriate. So I'll get into that in more detail later on. So yes, homeopathy basically came about around the same time as Vitalism. So there's obviously a movement, mostly in Germany, and the guy that discovered or created this system, his name's Samuel Hahnemann. He was a physician, a chemist, a linguist, a historian of medicine, and a scientific revolutionary, or I guess a heretic. So he was just way ahead of his time and more aligned with what now we call quantum physics than the Newtonian physics of his day. So he was very, very disillusioned, and he actually stopped practicing as a physician, and he basically delved more into translating medical texts. And that is where he had his light bulb moment, a bit like when the apple dropped on Einstein's head. This was the moment for Samuel Hahnemann. So he was translating a text by the Scottish physician William Cullinan, and it was about toxicology, and it was about Peruvian bark. So quinine is or was extracted from Peruvian bark, and quinine was used to treat malaria. So in this translation, he was struck by the similarity of the the symptoms of toxicology. So if someone ingested too much Peruvian bark, the symptoms looked like malaria. So he was struck by that similarity, and he then it set him off on a quest to experiment and to discover if this could be a principle, a healing principle. It wasn't just a coincidence. Could it be that this was actually the healing principle behind this particular medicine and behind others? So he came up with this principle, which he called like cures like, and the name homeopathy from the Latin basically means like suffering. So he that was one of the principles that he discovered, or is really the basis for the homeopathic method. So homeopathy today, it had its origins in Germany, but it's really spread all over the world. Europe, the UK, North America, South America, India, and beyond. I find just by seeing what's published online and social media that it seems to be particularly embraced, and also speaking to colleagues, it seems to be particularly embraced in Germany, France, and India, and I think in those places there's far more integration, there's far more medical doctors trained as homeopaths and actually prescribing homeopathy or referring for homeopathy, whereas in other parts of the world it's like you have two different schools of medicine, and never the twain shall meet. And then for those of you that notice that there's often, differences in spelling, there are two different spellings of homeopathy. The one with two O's is the UK spelling, and the one with one O is the US spelling, and both are correct. For those that want to delve deeper into homeopathy and the brief introduction that I gave, I would recommend one of either of these two books. And because I think part of homeopathy's inaccessibility has been the language in which it has been written. The language is archaic. It's basically most of it was all written in German, and then there have been translations, and so these two books are quite current and recent, but so very accessible. They're not short, they really are big tomes. So for anyone who's really interested and serious to know a bit more about homeopathy, I would direct you to these resources. So it seems like there's a war between mechanism and vitalism, and so I'd like just to remind everyone, I think everyone here today doesn't need that reminder, but the clients and the patients that you're able to influence, that we need to keep an open mind. There's so much we don't know, but let's keep an open mind, but not so open that our brains fall out. I think that yes, for me, the curiosity for the truth really helps me to keep my eye, on the one hand, on the science, and on the other hand, on the anecdotes. So I'm going to do a little bit of name dropping here. I'm not a physicist, and I don't, yes, it's not my area of expertise. So I'm going to do a bit of name dropping in terms of where research has been done, not necessarily into homeopathy, but in physics, that has given insight and context to the workings of dilutions and homeopathic remedies. So we have Brian Josephson. He was a Nobel Prize winner. He's quite an old man now, but he's basically more into homeopathy than or finding the mechanism and proving the mechanism behind it than ever. We have Jacques Bonavista, and yeah, he wrote a controversial paper, or a paper that became controversial and was withdrawn from Nature. And that is where the term memory of water came from. It was in his research, which was actually in immunology. And then we have the Japanese Mazzaro Emoto. I couldn't even really find out whether he was a doctor or is a doctor. So I'm just going to call him an author, because a lot of his books, they provide context to homeopathy, in that they talk about the power of thought, which is energetic, on water molecules, but it's not really homeopathy. It's got nothing to do with homeopathy. So it can, like I said, provide context and provide a bit of a trail for where we need to investigate to prove how homeopathy works. But it does tend to mislead a little bit in the homeopathic context. So maybe we're getting closer. I don't know. The latest research, also a Nobel Prize laureate, by Luc Montagnier. So his research was into AIDS and the AIDS virus, and yes. So coming from him, you know, he says that high dilutions are not nothing. You know, they are something. So there's obviously still more questions than answers in this regard. And so if anyone wants to, or is interested in the process of homeopathic research, I want to direct you to the HRI, and also to the LMHI. So basically that's a world umbrella organization for homeopathic doctors and homeopathic associations, with members from 76 countries. So that was actually founded here in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam, in 1925. So that's also a really good, solid professional body to follow if you're interested in the homeopathic process and research processes and what's happening in the world of homeopathy. So I feel that sometimes one has to clarify what homeopathy is not, because it gets lumped in with a lot of other modalities. It gets lumped in with herbs and herbal medicine. It is true that a lot of the remedies, homeopathic remedies, come from herbs, but you know, they're not herbs anymore. They've been diluted and shaken and in a successive preparation, and it's a different animal now. So homeopathy is not vitamins and minerals. Homeopathy is also not flower essences. Flower essences are energetic, but they're not homeopathic. The tissue salts, or the Schussler cell salts, are also not homeopathic. They are dilutions, but not homeopathic. And homeopathy is not a religion. It's not witchcraft, and it's not pseudoscience, although Wikipedia would disagree with me. So does homeopathy work? Yes and no. And that's what I'd like to share with you, so that you can recognize when a case might benefit from homeopathy and when a case is just way too complex in some senses. I'll explain that further. So coming from a homeopath, yes, homeopathy works some of the time, and it doesn't work all of the time. So the best conditions to use for homeopathy can be acute or chronic. You know, basically homeopathy can help a wide range of cases. It's very effective when there's a strong psychosomatic component. So yeah, when people have been told that it's all in their head, usually it's a homeopathic case, or they could benefit from a homeopathic remedy. It's used for prevention. It's used in epidemic. It has been used in epidemics. It has been used in the COVID pandemic. So it has a place in epidemic prevention. It's used as a self-care tool for families at home. I use it, for first aid. I used to carry around my kit when I went to the sports field, and luckily my kids never got injured, but I was always dispensing medicines to everybody else's kids. And it can be used when you travel as well. So places like Helios Pharmacy in Ainsworth, and probably there's some local pharmacies here in the Netherlands as well, have quite nice first aid kits that are good for home prescribing for mums and dads, and also for traveling. So when does homeopathy not work so well? I find that if I can show you this infographic, we talk a lot about the onion and the layers of the onion in homeopathy, and I think this is not necessarily functional medicine. What all of your understanding of functional medicine will you will agree with this approach. So what we need to do is we need to peel away the layers of the onion, and basically a simple case will have one or two or just a few layers, and a complex chronic case will have probably many layers, and that's the difference between a simple and a chronic or a complex case, and that's the difference between whether homeopathy is going to work well or not. So the cases with the many layers are the cases that have food allergies and intolerances. They have toxicities. They have intractable stress. Someone who is in an abusive relationship, living with an abusive partner, it's just, I don't think anything really works in that situation. You've got to kind of leave it. So intractable stress, frank deficiencies or excesses in hormones, advanced pathology. So it doesn't mean that homeopathy won't work at all. It just means that homeopathy will probably be more suited as an adjunct to other modalities. So yes, achieving health is like peeling the layers of an onion, and so these are all the different kind of layers that can act like obstacles. And then in my two cases, I'm going to show you how one was a fairly simple case and the other one was a complex case, and it was complex because it had more layers. So we'll go into that in a very kind of detailed, practical way in a minute. So we have symptomatic and constitutional prescribing. I'll explain that in the cases as well. And symptomatic is basically, homeopathy can be, you can prescribe on symptoms. You can take arnica for a bruise, and then you can also prescribe more constitutionally, where you look at the whole picture of the patient. You can use single remedies, that is called simplex prescribing, and you can use mixtures, and that is called complex prescribing. So how I work is by marrying homeopathy, the energy, with functional medicine, the matter. I also, through my homeopathic training, focus on, with the case taking, with really listening and observing, and then obviously personalizing. So the personalization aspect is common to both homeopathy and functional medicine, and I think that's why functional medicine came so naturally to me. All right, so how are we doing, by the way? I'm just kind of forging ahead. Is everyone still awake?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I have two cases. It was really difficult for me to choose which cases to present because there are just so many. So, but I think these are representative of how my practice was in South Africa. I had a family practice, and what happened was the mother would bring in the child, and then the mother would bring in the other child, and then the mother would come for herself, and then the mother would send the father. So in both these cases, I treated the whole family. So flora came to me, her mother brought to me when she was 3 months old. George came around about the same time. They were both the second child. They both were cesarean section births, and they were both breastfed for quite a lengthy period. So, but that's where the similarities end. So Flora had very normal growth and developmental challenges. So children get sick. It's a myth to say that children don't get sick, and it's the way their immune system learn to flex their muscles. So when children grow, often that's the time where illnesses strike, because all the nutrients and the energy is going to those growing areas, and maybe there's not enough to go around for the immune system. So Flora had challenges when she grew, but her challenges were easily resolved. So she came to me for teething issues. She came to me when she had childhood illness. She came to me with a range of mainly skin issues. And so when we see skin issues predominating in cases like this, it's usually quite a good thing. It means the pathology is superficial. It's not deep down in places of the body you can't see. So I actually ended up seeing her for 10 visits over an 8-year period. Okay. And then if we contrast that to George, he also had growth and developmental challenges, but these were a lot more difficult to manage. He came with colic. He had mostly, so where Flora had mostly skin issues, he had mostly mucous membrane issues. So respiratory, he was diagnosed with asthma, lots of allergies. Just as an aside, so Flora came, the first time she came with actually that's on the next slide, I'll get to that now. Yeah, so George also had sensory integration problems. His issues resolved with multiple pharmaceutical interventions and hospitalizations. So, I was not the only practitioner involved with managing him. He had his general practitioner, he had his pediatrician, and they had me. But this is the difference between a simple and a complex case, and what often happens in complex cases is people don't get results, and then they believe that homeopathy hasn't worked for them. And the reason it hasn't worked is because of those layers and the need to actually work with other modalities, and also the need to possibly, for things probably take longer as well. So Flora at 3 months came with thrush and a nappy rash. She'd recently been vaccinated, and her in South Africa they vaccinate for TB routinely, and the site of the vaccination was still discharging 1 month later, and she had a runny nose. So I prescribed homeopathic remedies. 2 months later she was back with teething. Another 2 months, bit of croup and bronchitis. And then I didn't see them for a while, which often happens with families like this. They're with you for a while they're in crisis, and then they go away and they're fine and they can manage things for a while on their own, which is what you want. So at 4 years, she had hand, foot and mouth disease, which is Coxsackie virus. She developed some eczema after that. Around about the time she started school, she started bedwetting, which was unusual because she was already fully potty trained, and we picked up a parasite infection. And then the next year or so, she started to lose her baby teeth, and that in itself is a growth spurt. So they came again for help with that growth spurt. So gave, this is a summary of 9 years of treatment. So it's impossible. I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but I used a combination of modalities here. So I used some constitutional prescribing, and her constitutional remedy was sulfur. I used quite a few symptomatic remedies for the teething and for some of the skin issues and the rhinitis. So the belladonna, the chamomilla, Hepasalf, these are all remedies that I used symptomatically. I also used a bit of homotoxicology, which are these complex mixtures. So they're mixtures of homeopathic remedies that I believe also have a place in order to drain and just help the body on a more physical level. And then we did quite a bit of supplementation. So she responded really well to probiotics, to omegas, a bit of vitamin D, a little bit of iron, some B vitamins, calcium, magnesium, and zinc. So these were the things that I pretty much prescribed, and then yeah, the parents would also, you know, go home and use them in between whenever they thought it was appropriate. We did in fact do hair analysis for her, and I didn't put the report in for Flora. But the only thing that we picked up that was a problem is she had high copper, and she also had high aluminium, but not really that high. You know, those were the two raised minerals. So in terms of lifestyle and dietary advice, we put down the copper source to the high amount of refined carbohydrate she was having in the form of baked goods. Yeah, the carbohydrate, high carbohydrate diet often pushes up copper, and baked goods often can contain aluminium. And then, yes, I said to the mom to just mostly eat organic food. So she really was a very robust and healthy little girl. She's now a teenager. So on to George. Yes, so they came in with colic, and he really, you know, I think if I go back to how many times did I see him, you can see there 19 times in the same time period. So, you know, they weren't only seeing me, so they lived at the doctor's one way or the other. So yes, teething. As soon as they introduced solids, he got bronchiolitis and was hospitalized, and then basically developed respiratory allergies. So all the time using homeopathic remedies, but also using the remedies, the medicines prescribed by the pediatrician as and when they needed to get out of crisis. Around a year, he was really battling with digestive issues, and yes, we had the cycle of fevers and respiratory illnesses for the first 4 years of his life. And you know, like I said earlier, it's quite normal for kids to get sick, but what's not normal is when things don't resolve with minimal intervention. So this was a case where things really didn't resolve easily. At 4, he was diagnosed with asthma, and from 4 to 6, he was, like his mom said to me, just constantly ill. So at 6 years, they saw a dietitian, and the dietitian diagnosed him with leaky gut from a IgG food hypersensitivity test. And he was reacting to gluten, dairy, soya, eggs, and nuts. And she put him on an elimination diet, and I didn't see them for 2 years. So this made a huge impact in this little boy's life. Then at 8 years, they were back in my office because he was suffering from constipation and bowel impaction. So we treated that with a range of natural products and homeopathic remedies. And then a year later, he developed this rash. And at the time, we thought it was also Coxsackie virus. It's quite common in South Africa. I don't know if it's that common here. But as we soon realized it wasn't Coxsackie virus. The pattern wasn't quite right, but we were a bit stumped as to what it was. So it was actually dermatitis herpetiformis, which is a symptom of celiac disease, or they call it a celiac rash. So around that time, I had already started my functional medicine training, and I basically said, I think we should do a celiac screen, because something's not right here. And so at 9 years, we did, before we did the celiac screen, we did the hair analysis. And what was interesting there was that his first test, his calcium was really, really low. And then as we corrected things, his arsenic and aluminium crept up. So we managed both the low calcium and the heavy metals that he started to excrete. But I assumed that the low calcium was to do with the gut, the state of the gut, and the fact that he was also growing. So his calcium needs were just not being met, and he wasn't absorbing calcium. So we discovered the reason he wasn't absorbing calcium was because of gut dysbiosis, and because of the celiac markers. So this came as a bit of a revelation. It was probably one of my first cases that I used the functional medicine method, and finally, came up with something concrete. But it took 9 years. So what David was saying earlier about finding someone that is an expert in a certain field. Well, even the experts in this field, the pediatrician, the general practitioner, the dietitian even, were clueless. So, this was the equivalent of what we have now, the GI map test. This was done through another lab in Cape Town, and it basically was probably the forerunner to what we now know as the GI map. And you could see we picked up very low levels of lactobacillus and the commensal E. coli, the good E. coli, where the hemolytic E. coli was positive, and then there was also the Klebsiella pneumonia was also positive. His IgAs were also low. So we went ahead and worked on that. But here again is just a summary of the interventions that we used over the years. And so with him, I used a lot of homeopathic remedies, and they always had a good effect, but they never, the effect was never lasting. And so when that happens with homeopathic remedies, it's because there's an underlying obstacle, and his underlying obstacle was gut dysbiosis and potentially the gluten intolerance, and leaky gut on top of that as well. So with him, his constitutional remedy was silica. And there were quite a few symptomatic prescriptions, even things like thymus 7CH and interferon 6CH. I used also homotoxicology, and what I also find when I find dysbiotic organisms in the gut, I often use the homeopathic remedy, the corresponding homeopathic remedy, to help to remove the susceptibility or the towards the organism. So we will use normal sort of herbal antimicrobials, and then we'll follow with, in this case, it was the Sanukel Kleb for the Klebsiella, and the Sanukel coli, which was for the E. coli. And he did very well on probiotics. He did very well on IgG. Obviously, the calcium and the magnesium and the vitamin D was also for him essential. Aloe vera juice for the constipation, L-glutamine for the gut repair. So yes, this is sort of, like I say, an example of a case that was not simple, and that really did require you know, the functional medicine skill set to resolve things. So yes, let me just end on this final sort of concept of, you know, is this helpful? Is this heresy? Is what I've presented here, yeah, to me, it's probably been just representative of the last 20 years of my you know, work in practice, and so to me, it amounts to a lot. But I'm hoping that we can look to combining the best of the vitalistic model with the best of the mechanistic model and create something new, create a new paradigm in health. So thank you. If anybody would like to reach out to me afterwards, please do so. Otherwise, I think we'll probably, you know, open the mics and you can ask me questions, or we can just have a discussion. Whatever you guys want to do is great. Thank you very much.